Imagine a book so controversial that it rewrote the fate of alchemy forever. Summa Perfectionis wasn't just a dusty old manuscript. It was a declaration of war between those who believed in transmutation and those who wanted it buried. A book that dared to challenge the very nature of reality. But here's the shocking part. Its true author might not be who you think. Why would someone risk their life to write it? And more importantly, what did they know that was so dangerous? Let's crack open this centuries-old mystery and find out. To understand why Summa Perfectionis caused so much chaos, we need to step back into the medieval world, a time when science, magic, and religion weren't so easily separated. Alchemy was more than just a quest for gold. It was a spiritual pursuit, a path to unlocking the secrets of creation itself. But with that ambition came a dangerous divide. Some believed alchemy was a gift from the divine, a way to perfect nature and transform base metals into gold. Others, particularly the more skeptical philosophers and religious authorities, believed alchemy was nothing more than heresy or fraud, a deception that threatened the very fabric of society. Summa Perfectionis didn't just step into this battlefield, it ignited it. Now, what makes Summa Perfectionis so fascinating isn't just its radical ideas, it's the mystery of who wrote it. Originally, the book was credited to Geber, the legendary Islamic alchemist also known as Jabir ibn Hayyan. But historians now believe it wasn't written by Geber at all. Instead, its true author may have been a European monk named Paul of Taranto, a man working in the shadows, blending Islamic science with Christian mysticism, all while hiding behind a fake name. But why? Why would someone forge an identity just to publish a book on alchemy? Was it to protect themselves from persecution? Was it to lend credibility to their ideas? Or was it something even more sinister? What makes this book even more controversial is what it claimed. Unlike many alchemical texts, Summa Perfectionis wasn't just a collection of cryptic riddles and symbols. It was a bold, structured defense of alchemy itself. It argued that alchemy was real, that metals could be transformed, that nature wasn't perfect, human art could improve upon it. And that was a direct challenge to the philosophers of the time. The great Aristotle himself had declared that nature was supreme, that art could never surpass the natural world. Even the renowned Islamic thinker Ibn Sina, Avicenna, claimed that transmutation was impossible. If Summa Perfectionis was right, then Aristotle and Avicenna were wrong. And if they were wrong, the entire foundation of medieval science could crumble. This wasn't just an argument about gold. This was a battle over truth itself. So what happened next? Summa Perfectionis spread like wildfire. Some alchemists swore by it, claiming it was the most important alchemical book ever written. Others called it a dangerous lie, an illusion that led countless seekers astray. Even today, scientists and historians still debate its significance. But here's the most important question. Did Summa Perfectionis unlock real secrets about alchemy? Or was it just wishful thinking, a medieval fantasy wrapped in scientific language? By the end of this video, you'll know the truth behind Summa Perfectionis, why it was so controversial, and how it shaped alchemy for centuries. So, let's dive deep into the book that divided science and magic, and find out whether the alchemists of the past were onto something much bigger than we ever imagined. To truly understand Summa Perfectionis, we need to step back into a world that might feel both familiar and completely alien. The Middle Ages, a time of mysticism and discovery, where science, philosophy, and religion were woven together in ways we struggle to comprehend today. And at the heart of it all, alchemy. Alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold, though of course that was the dream. It was about unlocking the hidden forces of nature. It was about perfecting the imperfect, not just in metal, but in life itself. Alchemists weren't just scientists, they were philosophers, magicians, and seekers of divine truth. They believed that, just as base metals could be transformed into gold, so too could the human soul be purified and perfected. But not everyone agreed. Skeptics and philosophers argued that alchemy was impossible, a fool's errand, a misguided attempt to play God. And that is where Summa Perfectionis enters the story, a book that didn't just defend alchemy, but declared war on its critics. Summa Perfectionis was no ordinary manuscript. It wasn't a collection of vague symbols and mystical poetry like many other alchemical texts. No, this was something different, something bolder. It was a manual, a guide meant to lay out, in clear terms, not just how alchemy worked, but why it worked. It was a response to the skeptics, a direct challenge to those who said transmutation was impossible. And in doing so, Summa Perfectionis became one of the most debated books in alchemical history. Inside its pages, Summa Perfectionis is divided into 3 major sections, each one tackling a fundamental question about alchemy. Let's break them down. Section 1. The theoretical defense of alchemy. First, the book sets out to prove that alchemy is not a fantasy, it's a science. At the time, many philosophers, especially those following Aristotle and Avicenna, argued that nature was unchangeable, that no amount of human effort could turn one metal into another. But Summa Perfectionis says they were wrong. It argues that metals are not fixed and unchangeable, but are actually mixtures of different elements that can, under the right conditions, be transformed. It claims that alchemy is simply accelerating nature's own process. Given enough time, nature does turn base metals into gold deep within the earth. So why couldn't an alchemist do the same, just faster? This was a direct attack on centuries of philosophical thought. If Summa Perfectionis was right, then the foundations of medieval science were flawed, and that made this book incredibly dangerous. Section 2. Metallic transmutation, turning lead into gold. Now, let's get to the part everyone wants to know. How do you actually turn lead into gold? The second section of Summa Perfectionis details the process of metallic transmutation. According to the book, all metals are made up of 2 fundamental principles: sulfur, which determines their hardness and combustibility; mercury, which determines their malleability and purity. The reason lead is dull and heavy, and gold is bright and untarnishable, is because of how these 2 elements are combined. And so, Summa Perfectionis claims that by purifying and recombining these substances in the right way, an alchemist can create gold from lesser metals. The book even describes alchemical furnaces, methods of sublimation and distillation, and specific recipes meant to purge impurities and refine substances into something closer to gold's perfection. To believers, this was proof that alchemy worked. To skeptics, it was pseudoscience wrapped in elaborate terminology. But one thing was certain: this book was too detailed to be dismissed as mere myth. Section 3. Testing gold and silver, proving the impossible. But let's say an alchemist claimed they had created gold. How could they prove it wasn't a clever forgery? The final section of Summa Perfectionis lays out a series of tests, methods that could separate real gold from counterfeits. It describes ways to test for purity by heating the metal and observing how it reacts. Weight. Gold is denser than other metals. Acid resistance. Real gold doesn't dissolve in most acids, but imposters do. This was revolutionary, because if Summa Perfectionis was right, then alchemy wasn't just philosophy. It was testable, verifiable, and repeatable. And if that was true, then maybe, just maybe, the skeptics were wrong after all. Summa Perfectionis wasn't just a book. It was a bold statement about science, reality, and transformation. It argued that alchemy wasn't sorcery, it was knowledge, that nature could be perfected, and that humanity had the power to reshape the material world. For some, it was a beacon of truth. For others, it was the most dangerous lie ever told. So was Summa Perfectionis a revelation or a deception? To find out, we need to dig even deeper into the battles, the betrayals, and the centuries-long war over alchemy itself. Because this book wasn't just debated, it was feared. And that's where our story truly begins. Throughout history, the most powerful books, the ones that change the world, often come with a mystery. Summa Perfectionis is no exception. For centuries, this book was attributed to a legendary figure, a man whose name was whispered with awe among alchemists, the great Geber, also known as Jabir ibn Hayyan. But here's the problem. Geber didn't write it. The truth is far more complicated and far more mysterious, because the real author wasn't an 8th century Islamic scholar from Baghdad. Instead, evidence suggests he was a medieval European monk, someone working in secret, using Geber's name as a disguise, a man named Paul of Taranto. But why? Why would someone forge an identity to publish an alchemical manuscript? What was at stake? And more importantly, what were they afraid of? Let's unravel the mystery. For centuries, the name Geber carried immense weight in the world of alchemy. Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber, was one of the most influential figures in early Islamic science. His writings covered everything from metallurgy to medicine, from philosophy to alchemical theory. He was a man of legend, credited with writing thousands of books on the secrets of nature. His work laid the foundation for alchemy in the Arab world, and later in medieval Europe. So when Summa Perfectionis appeared, it only made sense to assume Geber was behind it. The book was brilliant after all. It combined Islamic alchemical knowledge with medieval scholastic thought. It introduced radical ideas about transmutation and the perfection of nature. It felt like the kind of thing Geber would have written. But there was just one problem. The book wasn't written in Arabic. It wasn't written in the style of Geber's other works. And, most damning of all, it referenced ideas and debates that happened centuries after Geber's time. Something didn't add up. And as scholars looked closer, they began to realize the real author had to be someone else entirely. The evidence pointed to one man, Paul of Taranto, a Franciscan friar from 14th century Italy. Paul of Taranto was a skilled alchemist, a learned scholar, and a man deeply immersed in Islamic and Aristotelian thought. And most importantly, his other writings bear a striking resemblance to Summa Perfectionis. The ideas, the structure, even the language itself, they all match. The conclusion? Paul of Taranto wrote Summa Perfectionis, but he published it under Geber's name. And that raises a critical question. Why? To understand this, we need to step inside the hidden world of medieval alchemy. Back then, alchemists didn't just publish their ideas freely. They worked in secrecy. They used coded language, obscure symbols, and, most importantly, false names. Why? Because alchemy was dangerous. Dangerous to one's reputation. If you were wrong, you were a fraud. If you were right, you were a threat. Dangerous to the church. Many religious authorities saw alchemy as heretical, a way of playing God. Dangerous to the economy. If alchemists could really make gold, kings and merchants had a serious problem on their hands. So alchemists did what they had to do. They hid in plain sight. They borrowed names from famous figures to protect themselves. They cloaked their work in secrecy to avoid persecution. And that's exactly what Paul of Taranto did. By using Geber's name, he made his work seem more authoritative. He knew that a book by Geber would be taken seriously. After all, who would dare question the great Jabir ibn Hayyan? But this also meant taking a massive risk, because if Paul was ever discovered, he wouldn't just be dismissed as a fraud. He could have faced much worse consequences. Imagine this. You are a medieval scholar. You've dedicated your entire life to understanding the deepest secrets of nature. You write a book, one that you know could change everything. But no one will listen to you. No one will trust a Franciscan friar from Taranto, not when your ideas are so radical, so disruptive. So you take a calculated gamble. You publish it under a legendary name. And for a while, it works. Your book spreads across Europe. It's read by alchemists, philosophers, even kings. But then the questions begin. People start noticing inconsistencies. The book references ideas that didn't exist in Geber's time. The writing style is different. The formulas don't match. And slowly, the truth unravels. What happens next? You could be discredited, branded as a charlatan, perhaps even excommunicated or imprisoned for your deception. Paul of Taranto took that risk. Why? Because he believed in alchemy. Because he believed that the world needed this book. Because he was willing to risk everything to ensure that the knowledge survived. Today, we know the truth. Geber didn't write Summa Perfectionis. Paul of Taranto did. But does that make the book any less important? Does it mean its ideas were worthless? Or does it mean that Paul succeeded in his mission? That his book lived on, long enough for people like us to still be talking about it today? Maybe, in the end, it doesn't matter who wrote it. Maybe what matters is that the ideas survived, that they changed alchemy forever. And as we move forward in this story, we'll uncover just how deep this deception ran, and how Summa Perfectionis led to one of the greatest battles in the history of science. Throughout history, there have been wars fought with steel and fire, battles between kings and empires, where the fate of nations hung in the balance. But some wars are different. Some wars are fought with ideas. And in the world of medieval alchemy, there was no battle fiercer than the war over whether alchemy was even possible at all. This was a war between two visions of reality, a clash of philosophy, science, and belief. One side argued that nature is absolute, that human beings could never surpass the perfection of the natural world. The other side believed that nature was a work in progress, and that with the right knowledge, humans could do more than imitate nature. They could improve it. And at the heart of this war was one of the biggest, most dangerous questions in history. Can art, the work of human hands, be better than nature itself? This wasn't just a philosophical debate. It was a question that threatened everything. If the skeptics were right, then alchemy was a lie, a false science built on wishful thinking and deception. But if Summa Perfectionis was right, if alchemy did work, then it would mean that nature was not beyond human control, and that was an idea powerful enough to shake the entire world. To understand this intellectual battlefield, we need to look at the two great forces at war. On one side, we have Aristotle, the great philosopher of ancient Greece. Aristotle's view of nature was deeply influential in medieval science. To him, everything in the world had a natural order, and that order could not be broken. Metals in Aristotle's system were fixed and unchangeable. Lead was lead. Gold was gold. One could not become the other. no matter how much heat, pressure, or alchemical magic was applied. To Aristotle, human beings could mimic nature, but they could never surpass it. Alchemy, then, was doomed to fail. But on the other side stood a very different kind of thinker, one whose teachings became the foundation of the alchemical tradition itself, a mysterious figure named Hermes Trismegistus. Unlike Aristotle, Hermes taught that everything in nature is alive, in flux, always transforming, and most importantly, that humans have the power to accelerate and improve nature's process. To Hermes, alchemy was not just possible, it was inevitable. The world itself was a vast living experiment, and those who mastered its secrets could reshape it at will. And so, between these two giants, the battle lines were drawn. One side saw alchemy as a futile dream, a fantasy destined to fail. The other saw it as a pathway to perfection, a way to elevate both metal and man to something greater. And this battle wasn't just being fought in theory. By the 13th century, it had become a war of words, books, and reputations. Which brings us to one of the most powerful voices in this debate, a man whose words threatened to destroy alchemy forever. Few names in history carry as much intellectual weight as Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna. A brilliant physician, philosopher, and scientist, Ibn Sina's work shaped medicine, astronomy, and chemistry for centuries, and he had zero patience for alchemy. In his writings, Ibn Sina made two devastating arguments against transmutation. Art can never surpass nature. Humans can shape, refine, and manipulate materials, but they cannot create something better than what nature produces on its own. Metals cannot change species, just as a donkey cannot become a dog. A piece of lead can never become gold. The two are fundamentally different species, and no amount of alchemical trickery can bridge the gap. To many, this was the death knell for alchemy. If one of the greatest minds in science was saying alchemy was impossible, then who could argue against him? Alchemy wasn't just wrong, it was a fraud. And for the skeptics, Summa Perfectionis was nothing more than a house of cards, built on a lie. But the author of Summa Perfectionis wasn't willing to back down. He wasn't just writing a book, he was fighting back. Summa Perfectionis wasn't a neutral book, it was an attack. It was a counterpunch against Ibn Sina, Aristotle, and every skeptic who doubted alchemy's power. The book boldly declared that alchemy was real, that metals could change, that nature was not perfect, and that with the right knowledge, humans could perfect it. The author laid out step-by-step processes, claiming that metals were made of two fundamental elements, sulfur and mercury, and that by altering their balance, any metal could be transformed. It was more than just a scientific argument. It was a revolutionary idea. Because if Summa Perfectionis was right, then everything the skeptics believed was wrong. And that was an idea too dangerous to ignore. So why does this battle matter? Because the stakes were enormous. If Summa Perfectionis was wrong, then alchemy was a complete fraud, an illusion, a fantasy, a waste of time that had led countless seekers astray. But if it was right, then it meant that science had been blinded by arrogance, that Aristotle, Ibn Sina, and the skeptics had misunderstood nature itself. And most dangerously, it meant that the philosopher's stone, the key to transmutation, could actually exist. This debate raged on for centuries. Scholars, kings, and alchemists fought over it, each side refusing to yield. And even today, the echoes of this war still linger. Was alchemy a misguided dream? Or was it a lost science, one that modern chemistry simply hasn't fully uncovered yet? The truth remains elusive, but one thing is certain. Summa Perfectionis changed the course of alchemy forever. And as we move deeper into its pages, we'll uncover the next great battle, not just of ideas, but of power, secrecy, and the search for forbidden knowledge. For centuries, alchemists pursued a single impossible dream, an object that could transform the very nature of reality, a legendary substance said to hold the power of creation itself. They called it the Philosopher's Stone, a mythical powder, a glowing elixir, a fragment of divine knowledge, the ultimate key to unlocking the secrets of alchemy. With it, lead could be turned into gold. With it, sickness could be cured. With it, a person could even achieve immortality. The Philosopher's Stone wasn't just the goal of alchemy, it was its holy grail. But was it ever real? Did Summa Perfectionis reveal the key to its creation? Or was it all just a dream, a beautiful, impossible lie? And if it never existed, then why did so many people believe in it for so long? Let's uncover the truth. If you had picked up Summa Perfectionis in the 14th century, you would have read something shocking. The book didn't just defend alchemy, it claimed that the Philosopher's Stone was real. Not only that, it described exactly how it worked. According to the book, all metals were made from two fundamental elements, sulfur and mercury. Gold was gold because it contained these elements in their perfect, balanced form. Lead was lead because it was impure, incomplete, flawed. And the Philosopher's Stone? It was the substance that could purify imperfection. If an alchemist could create the right mixture, with the right proportions, under the right conditions, then they could accelerate nature's process, transforming base metals into gold. Summa Perfectionis didn't claim this was a miracle. It claimed it was science. And for alchemists, this was proof that their life's work was not in vain. Fast forward to today. Modern chemists and physicists will tell you the truth. Alchemy, at least in the way medieval alchemists understood it, doesn't work. Lead doesn't just become gold through heat and time. The sulfur-mercury theory of metals is wrong. The processes described in Summa Perfectionis are scientifically impossible. Or at least, that's what we think. Because here's where things get really strange. If the Philosopher's Stone was a myth, then why did so many alchemists claim they had seen it, touched it, used it? Take Nicholas Flamel, one of the most famous alchemists in history. According to legend, Flamel discovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone in the late 14th century. He went from being a modest bookseller to a man of immense wealth, seemingly overnight. His story became so legendary that even centuries later, people believed he had actually unlocked the secret of transmutation. Or, what about Johann Friedrich Böttger? In the early 1700s, Böttger claimed he had discovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. He was arrested by the King of Saxony and locked in a lab, forced to attempt transmutation under royal orders. He never made gold, but along the way, he accidentally discovered the process for making European porcelain, something just as valuable at the time. So did these alchemists really discover something extraordinary? Or were they just caught in their own delusions? If the Philosopher's Stone was real, where did it go? Here's the mystery. If the Philosopher's Stone never existed, then why does its legend refuse to die? Why did so many alchemists, across centuries and continents, swear that it was real? Some believed the stone was hidden, locked away by secret societies, passed down through the Hermetic tradition, kept out of the hands of those who weren't ready for its power. Others believed it had been destroyed, lost, when the last true alchemist took its secrets to the grave. And some Some believe it was never meant to be found at all. Maybe the philosopher's stone was never a real substance. Maybe it was a metaphor, a symbol for spiritual transformation, for the process of refining not just metal, but the human soul. After all, the real goal of alchemy was not just to change lead into gold. It was to change oneself, to seek knowledge, to unlock the divine mysteries of existence. Perhaps that was the real philosopher's stone all along. So, was the philosopher's stone real? Or was it the greatest illusion in history? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe the stone was never something to be found, but something to be understood. What if the alchemists weren't just searching for gold? What if they were searching for something much greater? And what if, hidden within the pages of Summa Perfectionis, there are clues we still haven't deciphered? Because here's the most intriguing part of all. Alchemy may have failed in its original goal, but in the process, it gave birth to something else. Something that would change the world in ways medieval alchemists never could have imagined. That something was modern chemistry. And as we move forward in this story, we'll see how the search for the philosopher's stone led to real discoveries. Discoveries that reshaped our understanding of the universe itself. Throughout history, knowledge has been a double-edged sword. It can illuminate the darkness, or it can be seen as a dangerous weapon, one that threatens the very foundations of power. And in the case of Summa Perfectionis, it was both. Because this book didn't just teach alchemy, it challenged authority. It dared to claim that humans could change nature, that they could imitate or even surpass the work of God. It whispered the forbidden promise that gold could be created, that wealth was no longer the domain of kings and merchants, but could be crafted by those who held the secret of transmutation. And that idea? It was terrifying to those in power. So Summa Perfectionis was not just debated, it was suppressed, it was banned, hidden, burned. And those who dared to practice what it preached, many of them paid with their lives. This is the dark side of alchemy, the story of how a book became a threat, and how those who followed it became hunted. To understand why Summa Perfectionis was feared, we have to understand who feared it most. And that brings us to one of the most powerful forces in medieval Europe, the Church. In a world where religion governed not just faith, but law and knowledge, the idea of alchemy raised some very uncomfortable questions. First, there was the problem of gold. If alchemists could really create gold, then what did that mean for the economy? Gold was the foundation of power, trade, and stability. Kings, noble families, and the church itself controlled immense reserves of it. But if anyone with the right knowledge could create it, the entire system could collapse overnight. Merchants would go bankrupt. Kingdoms would face economic ruin. Wealth, once reserved for the privileged few, would become meaningless. Alchemy, then, wasn't just a curiosity. It was a threat to the very structure of medieval society. And then, there was the spiritual danger. Because alchemy wasn't just about metals, it was about power over nature itself. The ability to transmute elements was frighteningly close to playing God. If only God could create, then what did it mean if a mortal alchemist could do the same? Was it a gift of divine wisdom? Or was it a sin, a blasphemous attempt to rewrite the order of the universe? To many religious figures, the answer was clear. Alchemy was heresy, and those who practiced it, they were marked for punishment. With fears of economic disaster and spiritual corruption, it didn't take long for the authorities to act. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Summa Perfectionis and other alchemical texts were being censored across Europe. Some church leaders denounced it as a tool of deception. Some monarchs outlawed alchemical practices, fearing their destabilizing potential. In certain places, owning a copy of the book was enough to warrant an accusation of fraud or sorcery. And in some cases, the book itself was destroyed. In cities across medieval Europe, alchemical texts were burned, not because they were seen as useless, but because they were seen as dangerous. The flames weren't just meant to destroy paper. They were meant to erase knowledge. But the fear didn't stop at destroying books, because if alchemy itself was dangerous, then those who practiced it were even more so. In the shadows of medieval Europe, alchemy was practiced in secret. But secrecy could only go so far. For some, the accusation of alchemy was a death sentence. The church's fear of heresy often overlapped with the fear of witchcraft and sorcery. And when the authorities wanted someone gone, it wasn't difficult to label them an alchemist, a fraud, or worse, a sorcerer. One of the most infamous cases was Edward Kelly, an alchemist from the late 16th century. Kelly, along with the famous scholar John Dee, claimed to have discovered the secret of transmutation. At first, he was patronized by royalty, treated as a man of rare and valuable knowledge. But when he failed to deliver on his promises, the mood turned. He was accused of fraud, arrested, and eventually died in captivity. Others faced even harsher fates. Some were burned at the stake, condemned as sorcerers. Some were tortured into confessions, revealing secrets they may or may not have even known. Alchemy wasn't just about seeking gold. It was about gambling with one's life. Because if you were wrong, you were a fraud. And if you were right, you were too dangerous to be allowed to live. By the 17th and 18th centuries, alchemy was slowly being replaced by chemistry. But the fear of alchemy never fully disappeared. Even today, we see echoes of it. Stories of hidden knowledge, lost texts, and secret societies. The idea that certain truths are too dangerous to be known. The lingering question, was alchemy really a lie? Or was it suppressed because it was too powerful? Because in the end, the real question isn't just whether alchemy was real. It's why so many people were terrified of it. And whether somewhere, hidden in the ashes of burned books and forgotten laboratories, some alchemist, centuries ago, actually discovered something they weren't supposed to find. Something that we were never meant to know. For centuries, alchemists believed they were on the verge of something extraordinary. They weren't just chasing gold, they were chasing truth, the ultimate understanding of nature itself. And at the heart of it all was Summa Perfectionis, a book that inspired generations of alchemists, leading them to believe that transmutation was possible. But what if it was all a mistake? What if the very theories that drove alchemy forward were the same theories that led it astray? Today, we know that metals don't change the way alchemists thought they did. Summa Perfectionis was built on flawed science, a misunderstanding of how matter actually works. But here's the twist. Even though alchemy failed in its grandest goal, it left behind something far greater than gold. It left behind the seeds of modern chemistry. And that may have been its greatest success. If we step into the mind of an alchemist in the Middle Ages, the idea of transmutation makes sense. Metals, they believed, were not fixed. They were simply different combinations of the same core elements. According to Summa Perfectionis, all metals were made from two fundamental substances, sulfur, which gave metals their combustibility and hardness, mercury, which gave them their malleability and brilliance. Alchemists thought that the difference between lead and gold was just a matter of proportions, and if you could find a way to purify and rebalance these elements, you could turn any metal into gold. It was a beautiful idea, logical, elegant, and full of possibility. There was just one problem. It was completely wrong. By the 17th century, something began to change. A new kind of scientist was emerging, one that relied not on ancient wisdom, but on experiments and evidence. And as they studied metals and elements, they began to realize something devastating to the world of alchemy. Metals aren't made of sulfur and mercury. They are not just mixtures that can be undone and rearranged. In fact, metals are fundamental substances, what we now call elements. No amount of fire, acid, or distillation could change lead into gold. The dream of transmutation, as alchemy imagined it, was impossible. For centuries, alchemists had been searching for a door that didn't exist, and one by one, their greatest beliefs unraveled. Alchemy, as a science, collapsed. But here's the incredible part. Even though alchemy failed in its original goal, it still changed the world. Because while alchemists never found the philosopher's stone, they did discover something else. Through their endless experiments, their relentless obsession with transformation, they uncovered real chemical processes that would shape the future of science. They discovered acids. They learned how to separate and purify substances. They developed distillation, sublimation, and crystallization, techniques we still use today. They gave us the foundations of laboratory science, flasks, furnaces, controlled reactions, and they laid the groundwork for the discovery of the periodic table, the understanding of chemical bonds, and eventually, the very science that would prove them wrong. Alchemy had failed, but in failing, it had given birth to chemistry. So, was Summa Perfectionis a mistake? Yes and no. Its theory of transmutation was flawed. Its vision of gold-making was an illusion. But the spirit of alchemy, the drive to understand, to test, to experiment, was what mattered most. Alchemy dared to ask, can we change nature itself? And though they were wrong about the answer, they built the road for those who would find it. Alchemy didn't end, it evolved. The question is, what if the alchemists were just ahead of their time? What if, one day, science does discover a way to rearrange elements at the atomic level? What if modern physics finds the secret that alchemists only dreamed of? Because in the end, alchemy was never just about gold. It was about possibility. And as long as we keep searching, as long as we keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible, maybe, just maybe, the greatest alchemical discovery is still ahead of us. For centuries, alchemists chased a dream, the dream of transformation. They weren't just trying to turn lead into gold. They were searching for something deeper, a way to understand the very fabric of reality. And at the heart of their quest was a single book, Summa Perfectionis. This book promised that alchemy was real, that nature could be perfected, and that with the right knowledge, the secrets of creation could be unlocked. But as the centuries passed, alchemy faded. Science moved forward. The world changed. And yet, Summa Perfectionis never disappeared. Its ideas, its theories, its spirit, they lived on. Not just in the minds of alchemists, but in the very foundation of modern science itself. So, was alchemy really a failure? Or was it something else entirely? A misunderstood science, waiting to be rediscovered? Let's uncover the true legacy of Summa Perfectionis. Alchemy may have been dismissed by some, but for others, it was an endless source of inspiration. Take Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientific minds of all time. Most people know Newton for his discoveries in physics and mathematics, for gravity, motion, and the laws that govern the universe. But what many don't know? Newton was obsessed with alchemy. He filled thousands of pages with notes on alchemical experiments, studying texts like Summa Perfectionis in search of hidden truths. For Newton, alchemy wasn't just superstition, it was a puzzle, a mystery that might hold the key to understanding reality. Then there was Paracelsus, the revolutionary Swiss physician and alchemist. He took the ideas of alchemy and transformed them into medicine, pioneering the use of chemicals in healing. He believed that the body was like a metal, something that could be purified and perfected, much like an alchemist sought to refine gold. And Robert Boyle, the father of modern chemistry. He studied alchemy too. He experimented with the transmutation of metals and believed that elements could be broken down and recombined, a theory that, in many ways, foreshadowed modern atomic science. So, while alchemy as a practice faded, its influence never truly vanished. Instead, it changed form, it evolved, and its greatest ideas survived. If you step into a modern laboratory, you might think alchemy is long gone. But look closer, because many of the techniques alchemists pioneered are still in use today. Alchemy gave us distillation, crystallization, sublimation, and filtration, methods that are still fundamental to chemistry. Alchemy taught us how to purify substances, how to study reactions, how to observe and record changes in matter. And while the search for the philosopher's stone ended in failure, it led to discoveries that would shape the future of science. For example, alchemists spent centuries working with mercury, sulfur, and salts, believing they were the key to transformation. What they didn't realize? They were laying the groundwork for the discovery of elements, the very building blocks of the universe. They didn't know about atomic structure, but they were asking the right questions, and in doing so, they helped pave the way for the breakthroughs that would come centuries later. So, was alchemy just a misguided dream, a dead science that led nowhere, or was it something more? Think about this. Science is built on trial and error. Every great discovery starts with failure, with ideas that seem wrong at first, only to lead to something unexpectedly profound. Alchemy may not have given us the philosopher's stone, but it set the stage for the scientific revolution. It pushed humanity to question what was possible, to test, to experiment, to challenge the limits of knowledge. And in many ways, isn't that what science is all about? Here's the most intriguing question of all. What if the alchemists were just ahead of their time? What if, in their pursuit of transmutation, they stumbled onto something bigger, something that modern science hasn't fully explored yet? After all, today's physicists are experimenting with nuclear transmutation, literally changing one element into another through particle physics. Something alchemists only dreamed of is now being done in high-energy labs. And the idea of transforming matter? It's at the core of quantum mechanics and nanotechnology. The more we learn about energy, atoms, and the nature of reality, the more it seems that transmutation, at least on a fundamental level, isn't entirely impossible. So, was alchemy really wrong? Or were alchemists simply asking the right questions before they had the tools to find the right answers? And so, we return to Summa Perfectionis, a book written centuries ago, a book that was once feared, burned, and ridiculed. It didn't give us gold. It didn't give us immortality. But what it did give us was the spirit of discovery. It inspired some of the greatest minds in history. It laid the foundation for early chemistry, and it taught us that the pursuit of knowledge, no matter how impossible it seems, always leads somewhere new. So, was alchemy a failure? Or was it just the first step towards something greater than it ever imagined? And if that's true, then maybe Summa Perfectionis wasn't the end of alchemy. Maybe it was only the beginning. For centuries, alchemists believed They were on the verge of unlocking the universe's greatest secret. And at the center of it all was Summa Perfectionis, a book that became one of the most controversial works in the history of alchemy. It wasn't just a manual. It wasn't just a theory. It was a challenge, a direct rebellion against science and skepticism. A book that dared to say, alchemy is real, nature is not perfect, and if we understand its secrets, we can improve upon it. This idea terrified some. It inspired others, and it kept the dream of transmutation alive long after the world had moved on. In the end, Summa Perfectionis didn't prove that alchemy worked. It didn't give us the Philosopher's Stone. It didn't unlock immortality or endless gold. But what it did do was refuse to let the question die. For centuries, it fueled the search for hidden knowledge. It inspired the minds of Newton, Paracelsus, and Boyle, men who took the ideas of alchemy and transformed them into modern science. Alchemy was never about gold. It was about transformation, not just of metal, but of ideas, of knowledge, of human understanding. And that, in itself, is a kind of alchemy, a transformation of the world, not through magic, but through discovery. Here's the real question. What if the alchemists were never actually wrong, just ahead of their time? What if, buried within their ancient texts and cryptic symbols, were fragments of truth, ideas waiting for the right technology, the right science, the right moment to finally be understood? Because here's something incredible. Modern physics is achieving what alchemists only dreamed of. Particle accelerators can transform elements. Quantum mechanics has rewritten what we know about reality. Nuclear transmutation, the ability to change one element into another, is no longer a fantasy. It's a fact. So what if modern science is simply proving piece by piece that the impossible was never impossible at all? What if the real Philosopher's Stone was never a substance, but an understanding, a knowledge of the universe so deep that it allows us to reshape matter, reality, and even life itself? Maybe Summa Perfectionis was never the end of alchemy. Maybe it was the beginning. Because as long as we keep searching, questioning, experimenting, as long as we refuse to accept limits, then alchemy never truly died. It simply became science. And if history has taught us one thing, it's that what seems impossible today may one day become a simple fact of nature. So the search continues. The dream of transmutation is still alive. And the question remains, what if alchemists were right all along? If you've enjoyed this deep dive into Summa Perfectionis and the forgotten world of alchemy, there's so much more to explore. From lost books of forbidden knowledge to hidden truths buried in history, our journey into the arcane and the unexplained is far from over. So, if you want to keep uncovering the mysteries of science, history, and philosophy, make sure to like this video to help others discover it. Subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive. Turn on notifications so you're always the first to uncover new secrets. And if you have thoughts, theories, or questions, drop them in the comments below. Because the best discoveries always begin with a question. Thank you for watching. And until next time, keep searching. Because somewhere out there, the truth is still waiting to be found.